Nothing contained in this podcast should be considered a substitute for professional medical advice. This content does not represent our respective employers and is purely the opinion of the podcast hosts. We are not your personal medical providers. Sorry, friends. So, if you have any questions or concerns or seeking advice, diagnosis, and or treatment, please seek individual, personalized advice from a healthcare provider in your area. We are not liable for any risks or issues associated with using or acting upon the information contained in this podcast. This is intended for educational and entertainment purposes only, so enjoy the ride. Welcome to Medical Media Mixer. I'm Nicole Peniston, clinical psychologist.
And I'm Tara Prisco, physician assistant. All right, so on our timeline of recording and real world timeline, our first episode is actually now launched. So we actually have real people, followers out there.
Woohoo!
It's very exciting. I mean, we definitely want more, absolutely, but it's pretty cool. So timeline wise, we recorded 4 episodes prior to even launching. So you'll see us, we'll talk about different things and you're like, it's not even that time of year anymore.
Yeah, just go with it. Just remember, be nostalgic about that time of year.
Exactly. So Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. We are in the new year.
Happy New Year.
Are we ready for 2025?
I mean, even if I'm not ready, it doesn't matter. Time marches on.
Yeah. So how was your time away in Nashville?
It was okay. My mom was sick, so with like a chest cold. So that was a little bit of a downer, but she was a trooper and we did all the basic bitch Nashville things like walk, that main street where they have all the bars and stuff, and shopped for cowboy boots. We didn't buy any.
Oh no, I expected cowboy boots.
Oh, I bought ones on Amazon ahead of time and they were super painful. So no, I was not going to spend
These
a lot of
boots
money.
were not made for walking?
Not the pointy toe ones. That's the lesson I learned. They looked really pretty, but they did not feel really pretty. And then we went to the Grand Ole Opry. That was really cool. And what else did we do? We did like some city tours. We went to the Johnny Cash Museum, which I really liked. Deb had never seen Walk the Line. And I was like, are you serious? That's an amazing movie.
It's great.
I told her she had to watch it, which is funny because I'm not a big fan of Joaquin. Sorry. But I love that movie. And I thought he was phenomenal in that. And then we went upstairs from the Johnny Cash Museum was the Patsy Cline Museum. So we went to that also. Not as crowded, sadly, but it was a nice museum. And then we went to the Country Music Hall of Fame. That was pretty awesome. Got to see like all kinds of costumes throughout the years. We saw Elvis's gold-plated car.
Okay.
Gold-plated Cadillac, I think it was.
Anything Dolly related? I like Dolly.
Not as much Dolly related stuff. I was hoping
we got to go to
Dolly
World, Dollyland,
Dollywood.
Dollywood, yes.
Dollywood.
Actually, that area is supposed to be really nice though. Gatlinburg and Pigeon Forge and like the just beautiful area. So eventually I do want to make a trip to there.
Maybe we need to go with the podcast.
Seriously.
I mean,
Dolly
contains multitudes. I'm sure she's got some medical or some mental health stuff we could talk
about. So I've been to Nashville once, but it was for a cheerleading competition when I was like 15. So there was no fun drinking bar things going on, but they did mistake our team for Team Hawaii because we had quite a few Filipino girls on our team. So I like half the girls. Yes. And I guess people were like, you must be Team Hawaii because you have brown people. I'm like, oh God.
Racism.
We're from New Jersey. Sorry.
Sorry that New Jersey is diverse.
Exactly. But that was my experience. I didn't get to see too much.
Yeah.
We actually went to the Poconos for New Year, and we rented a cabin with the family, extended family. And it was 6 adults, 5 children, and 3 dogs.
Was Mama P there?
Yeah. No, not my mom. My mother-in-law on that side of the family. So it was fun. The kids, there was a game room, so they were like relegated to their area, playing pool and shuffleboard and stuff like that. And there was a hot tub.
Nice.
I had the unique experience of watching the movie Cats in a hot tub.
The new movie Cats, the trippy one.
It is the strangest.
Oh my goodness!
My kids love it because it's so
off. Weird.
Like amazing actors and actresses, like the singing, the music, spot on. But what they did with that directing was like,
and like the AI stuff was
like cute. They're this big, then they're this big.
It was. I remember watching it and thinking that I was high, and I was
really
not.
Exactly.
So I wonder what it would be like if you were high when you were watching it. Maybe it would be normal.
I don't know. But my kids, it's a big running joke, so they had to show it to their cousins. So I sat in a hot tub and watched it on the screen.
It's funny you say that. Well, my first memory of a Broadway show was my parents brought me to see Cats, and we had really good seats, so they were literally like climbing up to me, and I was terrified.
Yeah, I mean, there's something about anthropomorphic cats.
Especially when you're like 7. I was like, what is life?
Honestly, living in the New York, New Jersey area, that commercial for the Broadway show
I can
on
still hear the music.
TV, right? Like that. Yes, it's such a part of our core memories of life. Like it's so strange.
And the big yellow eyes, Cats.
Yes.
On Broadway.
I actually think somebody I went to elementary school was in Cats. She was in a couple of Broadway shows.
Nice.
Shout out to Renee Marino. She was cool. She now does, I think she wrote a book. She does a bunch of other stuff now.
What?
And she was in the movie for Jersey Boys. Well, she was in the Broadway show for Jersey Boys.
Uh-huh.
And then she was in the movie with Clint Eastwood as the director. So that was pretty cool.
Good for her.
Hey, little Linden girl, St. Elizabeth, shout out.
Jersey girl's getting it done.
All right. So I'm doing a book today. Are you also doing a book?
I am. And I made the very, very poor decision to start the book on Friday night. And it is Sunday, for those of you counting. But I actually did finish it last night. So
is it the book I think we said or no?
No.
Different
book.
Completely different book. Okay.
Totally different book that I forgot I owned. And I was like, I've been wanting to read this. Let's do this now.
Okay. All right. So let me talk about my cocktail. Let me get my notes on my screen. Okay. So my cocktail, I'm going to post a picture on social media, and I will also try and put it on camera, maybe for a clip, because it's prettier than I think it's going to show up on here. It is called The Revolution, and it is based more on the book than the disease process.
I want a disease drink. That's why I've got mine.
It has gold glitter, edible glitter, and a black salt rim. Let me think.
Now, does it taste anything, the glitter?
I don't know. I haven't tasted it yet. Let's find out.
Inquiring minds.
The glitter doesn't taste like anything. Basically, I'll give you the ingredients, but it's essentially a margarita that's sparkly.
Yes.
So 3 ounces of silver tequila, half an ounce of agave, half an ounce of triple sec, juice from half a lime, half a teaspoon of edible gold glitter. They had said black sanding sugar, but I did salt because it sounds to me like a margarita, with a little pour of some carbonated water over it. So basically you take all the ingredients except for the carbonated water, ice, shaker, put in the glass. Before that, you'll have rimmed the glass with the salt, but it's tasty. It's essentially a sparkly margarita, and sparkle is fun.
So you're a salt margarita girl, because I'm a sugar margarita girl.
Oh yeah, no, salt for sure. And
I heard that you didn't have any limes. I could have
could
emailed you a lime.
I had to use a lemon in my margarita because I thought I had limes, but apparently not.
It's okay.
Yeah,
it's citrus.
It works.
Yeah.
So the reason it's sparkly with sort of the black is because it's supposed to be like a dragon.
Ooh.
So have you read the Fourth Wing and Iron Flame books?
I have not, but I know that they're super popular. I see them on Book Talk and all those other places. But girl, my TBR pile is like 40 books deep. And that's physical books. That's not even digital books.
Yeah, no, I will die before I ever read all of my books I want to read. But so I am a fantasy girl at heart. Like
Same.
Real but like I've read Lord of the Rings, all of it, Game of Thrones, of course, the, lighter stuff like Harry Potter, Dragon Riders of Pern is like a huge favorite of all time, is The Realm of the Elderlings, all those books. But this romantasy thing is like a thing now.
It is.
And so I have like torn feelings about it because I don't want to be like, no, only core fantasy, right? Like that seems like people want to read, you want to read. Like it's fun, whatever.
Yeah.
But I did read another romantasy series and the writing was really, really bad. And so that, like, I liked the concept.
You'll have to tell me after the podcast.
The writing, but don't mind me. I have to pat my nose here. Okay. So I was this one was so popular that I was almost like turned off. Mm-hmm. But then I read and I was pleasantly surprised. So I like the concept. I like the idea. I like the world. I like kind of the way it goes. I'm not going to give spoilers. This is very general. So Fourth Wing is the first book. Iron Flame is the second book. The third book actually is going to be released January of 2025. So it might be out before this actually posts.
Ooh.
So obviously I'm going to read that one. The plan is for a total of 5 books from what I can tell.
Who's the author?
So Rebecca Yarros.
Nice.
So apparently she was a more of a romance writer who delved into fantasy recently, if what I can tell.
Mhm.
But basically, Fourth Wing and the whole series follows Violet Sorrengail in her efforts to become a dragon rider at the Basgaith War College. In the beginning of the story, she enters the Rider's Quadrant, which is one of 4 quadrants in the story's War College, which cadets are taught to ride dragons. And she seems to be at a clear disadvantage. Unlike most people who train their whole lives for this to get into the Rider's Quadrant, she really had only been training for 6 months. She trained her whole life to actually be in the Scribe Quadrant, which is essentially like Uber librarians, I guess. They're like into the scrolls and all of that. Because of her perceived physical disability, she's seen by others as being weak and fragile and described to be very small in stature. But at the last minute, her mother, who's actually a general in the Rider's Quadrant, forced her to enter the Rider's Quadrant. So throughout the series, we see the trials that she faces. Already, this is a grueling thing. People die left and right. But her tasks are a little bit harder because she seems to have a condition that affects her joints. She shows signs of hypermobility, prematurely graying hair, joint pain, easy bruising, and brittle bones. She has frequent joint dislocations. And it's mentioned that she frequently needed the healers and the menders since her childhood. So she gets creative during her time there and uses her wits to help make up for some of the physical differences. And basically,
Question, you might have said this, but I missed it. Are they all like teenagers who are doing this?
So technically they're 21. That's actually a thing that people criticize in this book, that sometimes they act like teenagers. So technically this is not a young adult book. It does get very spicy. So very detailed and spicy.
Nice.
So definitely not young adult. But it is interesting because sometimes they are acting like teenagers and you forget, no, they're in their 20s.
Okay.
So, but one of the things that people have commented on and that the author shows a lot of examples of adaptation to help somebody with a disability. So she uses bracing and wrapping of her joints that she knows are prone to dislocation. She's given clothing, dragon scale armor, and rubber-soled boots, and a lighter backpack from her sister, who's a rider, to help her get through these challenges and to be safer. And she also even finds ways to mount her dragon. For her dragon actually helps come up with a saddle to basically keep her in without falling off. So basically,
her dragon like gives her tips on how to ride him.
Yeah, I mean, he's very old and wise. He's like the biggest dragon in all of their whole world. So
better than Falcor?
Yeah, this guy's badass. Like he's gonna
Okay. I'm glad you got that reference. Thank you.
Yes, of course. Oh my god. I think did someone say they're remaking that? If they are, please don't. Never-ending Story.
I just want to rewatch it. I don't want to remake it. I just want to watch it again.
But basically, it's interesting because, they really do subtly. I mean, it's a part of the storyline, but they don't come out and say anything of what exactly she has. They just basically, she's got this problem and she has to find ways around it to survive, literally to survive. So she uses her intelligence and her tenacity to help get her through things. And then she also kind of forms a chosen family, friends who become family, her team, who also help support her through everything. And they say that that's important for anyone living with any kind of disabilities, have that social support. And also they talk about like the healer who's known her as a child and having like a team of medical professionals who support you. So it's interesting, that this is weaved into the tale. So the author actually basically said that this is related to her own disability and a disability that her children have as well. So she's actually stated on social media that she has Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome.
That's what I was predicting when you were talking about it.
See?
Oh, look at me. I'm so smart.
You know your stuff. So yeah, Ehlers-Danlos is interesting because I would say most people who are not in medicine have not heard of it, although there is a lot more awareness now. Like there's because of social media and access to things. So Ehlers-Danlos is a disorder that essentially affects your connective tissues, which can include your joints, skin, and blood vessels. And these body parts become more lax and flexible, making being more prone to injuries. So again, it's something that I learned about, and it's something that it was rare and you kind of had to know it for a test question, but it's not something that I really ever thought about on a day-to-day basis when seeing patients.
Mm.
But in the past year, I've identified 2 patients with this.
And it's so funny you say that. In the past, I'd say 6 months, I've met people for psychology reasons who, when I'm doing my full biopsychosocial, they're talking about either having just been diagnosed with it or being evaluated for it.
Right.
And I feel like, again, I learned about it, I knew about it, but never really heard too much about it until recently. I wonder why. Any theories?
So I do think there's more awareness out there. I just know personally, it's just more on my radar. It was quite interesting. You know, the second time I identified it, I had a student with me. And the patient was very complex, and I was working with, she was new-ish to me, you know, a couple months, and I was asking her more questions. We were going deeper. And then I started going down this train of thought and asking more questions related to that path. And then my student and I made like eye contact, and she knew where I was going with it. And it was one of those sort of exciting moments. I don't know. It's this weird thing about diagnosing things that are rare. And you're like, oh,
I get
that's
it.
Like it all just sort of clicked. And I'm like, that makes sense. So it is very tricky. And the prevalence is honestly probably a lot more than we actually know. So give a little background. Ehlers-Danlos is named after 2 doctors, Ehlers and Danlos.
What? I thought you were going to say like Smith and Wesson.
Right. Who described this condition in the early 20th century. I found, honestly, from looking at like some of my go-to medical resources. So Medscape is great on the medical login side of it. I think eMedicine or whatever it is their regular people login, but I have like an account.
Regular people login.
You know what I mean. But I found, there you go. That's the word. So I found actually that a lot of the information there was not as up to date or was kind of muddy and didn't really lay it all out for you. The Ehlers-Danlos Society is an amazing resource. Anybody who's thinking about this, go on there, or even if you're just curious, go on their website. They have these beautiful infographics that shows like the overlapping signs and symptoms in other disorders. And, you know, because we'll go into the complexity of it. It's not a black and white diagnosis because there are actually 13 types. Which,
that makes sense.
Yeah. So, but their website, which is wonderful. And it also has where you can search for providers that specialize in it. So physical therapists, cardiologists, because we'll get into some of that, orthopedics, things like that. So a wonderful resource. I found that a lot more navigatable than my actual medical resources. So yeah, it's 13 different inherited clinically and genetically heterogeneous group of connective tissue disorders. So they all do have some sort of basis somewhere genetically, and we haven't identified the gene for each type, but for some of the types we have. And basically it makes you have poor coding in your DNA to make collagen and connective tissue properly. So connective tissues and collagens, there's all different types of collagens, and they different ones may be in different parts of your body, hence your joints versus your blood vessels versus whatever.
Versus your skin and hair when they
exactly.
market collagen for it.
Exactly. Yeah. Taking collagen for this will do nothing, and probably for skin, hair, or nails either. But that's another story. So basically connective tissues is throughout your body. It provides support, protection, structure to your body. And so basically this just prevents those connective tissues from functioning properly. So the defect is present since birth, but some of the things aren't going to cause you an issue until you're probably older. And some of these things may seem typical in more of a child and wouldn't be a red flag for anybody because it's not causing a problem. So as far as the prevalence, like I said, we really don't know because people can go their whole life and never be diagnosed.
Right.
They're saying it's maybe about 1 in 5,000 for all of the types. The hypermobile, they're saying, is 1 in 5,000 to 1 in 20,000. Classical, 1 in 20 to 40,000. Vascular, which is the most serious, is 1 in 10, somewhere between 10,000 and 25,000. So it's really tricky. We can't really nail it down, and it's not a stone cold diagnosis. So it's a combination of a clinical diagnosis and sometimes genetic testing that supports that.
Well, and I would imagine a lot of people who are seeking medical attention for these issues may be getting diagnosed with something else when it could be this underlying Ehlers-Danlos.
Exactly. And I guess what becomes frustrating is, honestly, there is no one treatment for any of it. You're really going to treat all of the symptoms or the other problems anyway. But it does give you more perspective and things to look for. So let's talk about the signs and symptoms. Like I said, 13 types. We can't go into everything, but the hypermobility is one of the most prevalent symptoms. So joint hypermobility means a person's joints have a greater range of motion that is expected or usual. Sometimes it doesn't cause them pain or problems, but one of the things that red flagged me on one of the patients was like, yeah, I've dislocated my shoulders multiple times. And I was like, yeah, that's not typical. Maybe one time, one shoulder, not both shoulders multiple times.
Yeah,
So,
or one of the patients I saw, she had sprained her knees and her ankles 3 or 4 times every year for the last 6 years. It's like, and she wasn't an athlete or anything. So it's
right.
What's going on?
Right. And so one of the patients I was talking about, who was a male patient, and I was talking more about very flexible, this and that. He's like, yeah, when I was a kid, I could do more splits than the girls in my gym class. And I was like, again, red flag, red flag. So that's one of the most prevalent symptoms. And then skin hyperextensibility is another one. And so, which is interesting. It's really going to be difficult because some of these things, a picture is 1,000 words or whatever they say. Look up the pictures.
I don't know if I want to on that one.
No, it's not. So say I put my hand here. How far can I stretch this skin? Right. But yours is kind of stretchy.
Well, I have hypermobility in my upper joints.
See, I'm going to diagnose you. Just wait.
Look, I got every problem in the book, so just add it.
So that is, there are specific measurements. I'm hitting my microphone. Specific measurements that more than 2 centimeters is typically what they say is associated with. Well, we'll say EDS because it's easier than me saying the whole name. They can also have what they'll call doughy skin and delayed wound healing. And then their scarring, they'll call it cigarette paper scarring. You'd have to, again, it's very difficult without looking it up, but just the way they scar is a little bit different. And that goes along with the tissue fragility. So just more vulnerable to damage, bruising easily, poor healing. And that can be fragility of the skin, blood vessels, abdominal organs, eyes, gums, all of this. So each type has its own diagnostic criteria. I am going to go into one thing called the Baton scale, because that's sort of our step one for specifically the hypermobile parts. And then usually if clinically you feel it's there, I'll send them to genetics and let them run the panels because I don't know all of the genes. And still sometimes they'll come back with oh, this is a gene of undetermined significance, but it's a collagen gene. So that's abnormal. So we don't know because we have not done the studies to know yet, but probably confirms it if clinically it fits. So if they don't perfectly fit the criteria, then they would just be called a hypermobility spectrum disorder. So that could be something like you're speaking about, that you're hypermobile or something here, but you don't hit all the criteria. So, let me get down to, let me give you, before I do, because I want to get to these sort of specific tests that we do, but a couple other things that do go along with this. And this kind of falls into very non-specific things, which maybe sometimes providers or people will push off as oh, this person has way too many non-specific complaints. It must be all in their head.
That's why I think I see some of those people. Right.
Fatigue, headaches, autonomic dysfunction. So if you've ever heard of postural orthostatic hypotension and tachycardia, You got it.
There's
So
an increase in
basically,
POTS lately, but that's for another
that
episode.
related to COVID probably,
Yes.
but some of these people have been suffering, for their whole lives and not known. So when they change positions, their blood pressure can drop, their heart rate can go up. Gastrointestinal problems, so delayed gastric emptying, gastroparesis, so just basically your stomach not emptying. Anxiety, of course, goes along with some of this. Chicken or egg there? Is the anxiety part of it, or is it caused by it? And then something else called mast cell activation syndrome, which is sort of related to allergic conditions, we'll say. I'm not going to say that I know everything there is to know about that, but it's associated with this.
I recently heard of a celebrity having that. I want to say Kate Beckinsale has it.
Maybe. I mean, it's one of these things that, like I said, this is one thing that social media is very beneficial for. It gives us access to these rare diseases and people starting to have some public knowledge about it.
Yeah.
So the Baton scoring system measures it, joint hypermobility specifically, and it depends on the age of the person, what is considered a positive scale. So in a child before puberty, they need 6 positive markers, whereas a just middle-aged adult only needs 5 because children are inherently more flexible than adults. And then an adult over age 50 only needs 4 to qualify because you tend to just become less flexible as you get older. So I'm going to do some of this on camera. I'm not sure how much of it we're going to use in social media posts, but please definitely go to the Ehlers-Danlos Society because they have great pictures and infographics of this. So the first one is your pinky. So what you'll typically do is you're going to rest your pinky on a flat surface. Obviously, you can't see my desk, so we're going to do that, we're pretending it's on a flat surface. And if you can put your pinky up past 90 degrees, you can use your other hand to do it, past 90 degrees. So you're right at 90. We're not talking about this little curve there, but past 90 degrees would be considered a positive test on that one. Now, thumbs. This is an interesting one. I definitely am not flexible on my thumbs. Taking your hands and trying to touch your thumb to your wrist or forearm. So you're nowhere near. I'm nowhere near. Yeah. So that's one of the criteria. Elbows. I'm not sure if I'll get this one on camera. Let me try and move myself over. No, we're not going to be able to do it. Basically, straighten your elbow. Let me back up. We're going to do this real fancy. Straighten your elbow. And if the angle when it's straight, goes past, how many degrees here? More than 10 degrees past straight, that would be considered hypermobile. And then your legs, if you stand and you straighten your legs, and if they sort of bow back past, how many degrees on that one? So 10 degrees on that. Yeah, 10 degrees also on the knees. So going past straight. And the last one is standing and putting your palms flat on the ground. That one I can do.
I can do too.
Yeah. So, that's the other one. So if you can put your hands flat on the ground with your feet flat on the ground without bending your knees. So that's sort of like step 1 in sort of thinking about it. And then we go into all the other questions, like we said, the skin, the bruising, all these other things. So like we mentioned, 13 types, the hypermobile type being the most common, classical EDS being sort of second in line there. And that one has some more of the skin issues, but vascular being one of the most dangerous. So vascular, because they can actually have aneurysms, dissections of major arteries. They can actually have perforations of their intestines. So that one is very important to identify early and to have basically a multidisciplinary team to follow you. So again, 13 types. We're not going to go into all of them. Go to the website. It's fabulous. How is it managed? Like I already alluded to, a multidisciplinary team. So cardiology, orthopedics, psychiatry, psychology, physical therapy, occupational therapy, sometimes an allergist, sometimes a neurologist. Being careful to avoid trauma and not participate in contact sports where you're going to be more likely to dislocate things. For some patients, particularly the vascular, pregnancy could be dangerous for them. Bleeding risk, actually, there is, if they have that tissue fragility, they could be more at risk of bleeding during certain operations. And then, of course, like we alluded to, the depression, ADHD, OCD, and actually autism are also correlated with this. Again, chicken or egg. I mean, we know autism is genetic, but the others, and ADHD too. But, depression, anxiety, some of these things, is it because of living with a chronic disease, or is it actually due to the underlying pathology of the chronic disease?
Right.
So, I mean, it's something that now that it's on my radar, and sometimes it gets like that with rare diseases, once you see it, you're looking for it.
Yeah.
So I think that's why from patient 1 to patient 2, I was like, all right, you know what I mean? I think this one is it. And I bet now that it's on my radar, I will probably find more. But again, it's how much does it affect their life? And that's what matters most. So the second patient, it is definitely affecting their life significantly. I'm trying to help them develop that multidisciplinary team so they have the right people in their court, because they can often be kind of brushed off as like your crazy mom, crazy girl, especially crazy woman with multiple complaints. And so I'm trying to help them advocate for themselves.
Does it occur more often in women than men, or kind of equally?
It does not, because of the genetics. It does not have a sex predilection, whatever the word is.
Predilection?
There you go. I'm like bad with words on the podcast. In real life, I swear, I have an amazing vocabulary.
This isn't real life?
Vocabulary is like great, but my pronunciation is off when it comes to this.
I got you.
So it's interesting, to see a character in a book who's subtly or not so subtly with one of these disease processes. So it was interesting. Books were fun anyway. I didn't read them for the podcast. I read them for fun and then came up with the idea. So,
nice.
Ehlers-Danlos, look up their website. Maybe you can diagnose yourself out there if you're listening, because a lot of providers don't have it on their radar. So it's something to think about.
Nice.
And that's what I got. So what do we got from you? I'm going to drink my cocktail now.
Yes, I almost drank all of mine while I was listening to yours. So the name of my cocktail is the Insomniac, because I will be talking about insomnia. And the Insomniac is, if you like an espresso martini or something like that, you're going to love this. I'm really enjoying this. It is 2/3 of an ounce of vodka, 2/3 of an ounce of hazelnut liqueur like Frangelico, 2/3 of an ounce of coffee liqueur like Kahlua, 1 ounce of espresso, 1 ounce of half and half. You drop that all into a shaker, add ice, shake vigorously for about 12 seconds. Double
12
strain.
seconds. You have to count?
I counted, and it came out delicious. Double strain into a chilled cocktail glass and garnished with coffee beans.
I like it.
And that was courtesy of drinkinghobby.com. So the book that I'm going to talk about today, that I did read for the podcast, but I actually already had in my to be read list or pile, and I just looked through the pile and grabbed it, is called Blood Orange Night, My Journey to the Edge of Madness by Melissa Bond. And this was published in June 2022. So this is the story, it's a true story of Melissa Bond, and it starts off, she gets married, she's 38, her husband is around that age, so it's, they're getting married a little bit later in life. She immediately gets pregnant, they're super excited, they have their first child, who is a son, and he is diagnosed with Down syndrome pretty early on. So they're adjusting not just to being a little bit older as parents and, newly married, but now having a special needs child. And then she gets pregnant approximately 7 weeks after giving birth to her first child. So really quick.
Wow.
Gets, right back in there. And I think it's about a month after finding out she's pregnant for the second time, she starts to have severe insomnia. We're talking less than an hour every night of sleep. And so this goes on for a couple of weeks before she decides to seek treatment. Because she's pregnant, many doctors won't prescribe her anything, especially since she's still in her first trimester. So she's really, really struggling. And then she comes across a doctor who begins to prescribe her benzodiazepines. So they start off giving her, I believe she starts off with Klonopin, whichever one is fine to take after your first trimester. She takes during her pregnancy. And then after she gives birth, the insomnia persists. And so then she gets shifted to Ativan. And I'll go into the drugs in a moment, but basically she's following the doctor's orders. She's taking the medication It works for a couple of days, and then she's back to the 1 or 2 hours of sleep a night. And now she has 2 babies, and she gets laid off from her job. So now she's unemployed, big stressors. So she's really struggling. And then her dose from Ativan pretty quickly gets up from 2 milligrams to 8 milligrams, I believe, which is an extremely high amount, which we'll get into the dosages in a minute, and you can weigh in on that. And so in about a year and a half of taking that high dosage, she starts to have some very, very significant problems. She starts having muscle weakness, falling, difficulty concentrating, hallucinations, and then just it's no longer effective for sleep. She's getting at max 4 to 5 hours of sleep a night on a good night.
Can I ask what year's time period in the world this is?
Yes, so it was 2008.
Wow.
So not as long ago as it should be.
Yeah, someone giving benzos to a pregnant or new mom at those doses in modern times. Wow.
Yes. And it's kind of funny, the way that it starts is that she's briefly prescribed something, and then the doctor is kind of like, you got to look into stuff. So she finds another doctor who is kind of just handing them out like candy and up in the dose, and is not around, is not really following her appropriately or properly. And she doesn't go too much into this doctor, other than the book does end with saying this person is still in practice and has no medical violations, even though she filed a complaint. And so essentially what happens is she is now addicted to these benzos and has to go through the very, very dangerous and difficult withdrawal weaning off period. So she works with a specialist in addictionology. Apparently that's a field.
Addictionology. I would say in addiction, but throw an ology on it.
That's how she referenced this doctor in the book.
Just throw an ology.
So she works with this specialist who, over the course of another year and a half, so now this is 4 years that she's been going on with this, helps her basically titrate down to I believe at the end of the book, she's taking 5 milligrams of something else that's safer. Whatever you would switch someone to when you're trying to get them off of.
Typically, I would go, in my practice, typically you're seeing Xanax, and that's the shortest acting. So you would change them to a longer acting like Valium or Klonopin.
So I believe she goes to Valium.
Yeah, which is diazepam. And then you would use that to wean them off, because it would be less of a sharp withdrawal because of the long half-life. It sort of naturally tapers in your system, and it's easier.
And I will say, all of that was beautifully described in the book. I didn't remember it all. Look, guys, I read this book in a day and a half. So I was going through at hyperspeed. But I got the point was that basically in order to drop down her dosage in a safe way, essentially what's happening is when she was on the Ativan, it messed up all of her neuroreceptors, specifically the GABA receptors. And so what that's doing is it's putting a slowdown on all of her bodily functions. And so if she goes off of that too quickly, then she uses the analogy of like a traffic light. It then gives all of those receptors a green light, and then everything kind of goes at once and crashes and burns. It can lead to seizures, stroke, coma, death, lots of really serious issues.
Very dangerous, yeah.
And it's extremely difficult to get someone off of those medications because of that high danger potential. Basically, someone could start going through withdrawal as soon as the medication is out of their system. So as soon as that half-life is up, they can immediately go into withdrawal. And so it takes her almost 2 years to drop down to a low dosage. I believe it was 5 milligrams of Valium, which also still has an addictive potential. But at this point, she has so many other medical issues and problems due to that addiction that that's the only way that she can really physically function and be at her best, is to still be taking that 5 milligrams of Valium each night to sleep, because the insomnia had persisted after all of it. Obviously, once she's getting healthier and they're titrating down, a lot of the symptoms are getting better. So not as many hallucinations. She's not falling. She's not injuring herself. She has more mental clarity during the day. But it really is a very long struggle. And I think the larger concept that she's trying to talk about in the book is that these are very dangerous medications that even a lot of doctors don't fully understand how dangerous they are, because all of the studies just say like, oh, well, only use this for about 2 weeks and at a low dosage. But none of them say what happens if you do it longer, or what happens if you do it more. And then there is a little bit of a preachy part of the book about how it's, big pharma, which I'm sure that is part of it. But it does seem like, from reading it from a perspective of understanding the pharmaceutical companies, understanding doctors and medical professionals, I think the research is just not there. And so doctors who are diligent stick to that short-term use, low dosage. And then those who maybe are not as diligent or are really looking for those hardcore studies, it's not out there. So they're just kind of prescribing and then seeing what happens. The other issue, too, that she compares benzodiazepine addiction to the opioid epidemic is the opioid epidemic started getting addressed because people were dying. People are not dying immediately from benzo addiction. It's a slow burn over time, and then they're slowly breaking down and dying, and it's not always connected immediately to the benzo addiction. And so it's harder for people to track. It's harder for people to understand. She talks about a lot of shame with being stuck on these medications and just wanting to be able to function and be a mother and be a wife. And so it's a really good book in talking about both the emotional turmoil and also the medical, the physical addiction potential and reliance on these medications just to be able to sleep at night. So that's the book. I have some pretty strong feelings about certain characters in the book. It is her real life story. She's changed names and things like that. But I'll leave it up to the readers out there to figure out who I'm talking about. But it's pretty clear there's one particular person in her life that is just kind of a big old jerk about it. Like, really, dude? Really?
So what's interesting is there was a time where everybody got Xanax, Ativan. Yeah. It was given out like to water and mostly to women. Mm-hmm. We'll talk a little bit.
Helper.
Right. And so I do have quite a few patients who, not of their own fault, have been on these for many, many, many years.
And that's another thing. A lot of this is the true being prescribed a medication to function and then finding out after a certain amount of time that they're now accidentally addicted versus someone who's out there seeking a high, looking for something that is bad for their bodies. These are just people following their doctor's orders.
Exactly. But these patients, I find, are very scared to come off. They're afraid of the anxiety occurring again. Mm-hmm. This was insomnia, but same idea, just the fear of that occurring again. I find that more difficult than many addictions. And the dangerousness, the seizures are an absolute real danger. So when we talk about addictions, alcohol withdrawal and benzodiazepine withdrawal are the most dangerous ones. Whereas opiate withdrawal, they say you feel like you're going to die, but it will not kill you. Right. It just feels really bad. So it's something I do come across. I do not start patients on these, but some few patients will be maintained. And if I have a new patient come into the practice, they're told immediately, let's address the underlying issue. Mm-hmm. Let's fix the anxiety with other ways. Right. And we're going to come up with a plan to get you off.
Yeah.
And it becomes tricky when they're elderly patients. And I'm like, oh my goodness, fall risks and all these things. And you've been on this for 40 years. And what am I going to do with this?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to go over first just an overview of generally what insomnia is. Then I'm going to talk about a couple of things that come up in the book that are very rare and uncommon. But if someone is really having this severe level of anxiety and they're starting to do research, these things might pop up. So I want to talk about them. Mm-hmm. But in general, the typical adult needs between 7 and 9 hours of sleep each night. That's dependent on several different things. But usually as we age, our sleep needs change. So that's, I'm not going to go in depth about all of that. But for a grown-up, 7 to 9 hours on average is what we need. Insomnia specifically is diagnosed if someone has a hard time falling asleep, staying asleep, waking up too early and not being able to get back to sleep, and then typically having some daytime symptoms because of those issues. But insomnia itself is just the difficulty with initiating and maintaining sleep. And so in my practice, when I'm doing psychological evaluations, I ask every single person about sleep because sleep is so important to restorative states, to physical health, to mental health. And so I'm screening everybody for insomnia. And then if I am seeing significant issues with sleep, I'm making recommendations in my evaluation about sleep, even if it has nothing to do with the diagnosis that I'm making. I know that the importance of sleep is talked about more in a lot of professions, but especially in psychology, we talk about it a lot because the majority of people we see have some sort of sleep problems. It may not qualify as a sleep disorder, but if you're struggling with sleep, it's going to affect your mental health. So some of the causes of insomnia, I just want to go over one other thing. Daytime effects of insomnia can be delayed reflexes, irritability, slower thinking, difficulty concentrating, not being able to work or participate in social activities, trouble with your memory, or just feeling tired, sleepy, sick, all that, stuff that everybody feels when you just don't get a good night's sleep. Most of the people that I have seen who have what we would diagnose as insomnia are probably getting on average between 3 and 5 hours of sleep. So it's not, what we're hoping for, but it's not as severe as this woman's talking about in this book. I kept like waiting for them to be like, jackpot, this is the diagnosis. This is the weird thing that's causing 1 hour of sleep a night. They never come to it. I honestly kind of got frustrated because throughout the book, people are telling her, oh, you're just stressed. You're a mom. You have a special needs kid, kind of pushing it off to her circumstances, which can definitely cause insomnia, but not to that severity. And then by like the last chapter of the book, she's like, oh yeah, that's why I have insomnia, because I have 2 kids. I'm like, I don't know about that.
Yeah, anyone would say, let's go to sleep medicine specialist. Let's get a sleep study. Let's do, sleep latency testing. And
exactly, which back in 2008, maybe those things weren't available to her where she lived or, where she was at, maybe. But they're definitely recommendations that I would be making now, especially just going to see a sleep specialist, going to get a sleep study and to look at these things, because there can be so many other things that are impacting your sleep than just being a stressed out mom. Not to discount being a stressed out mom. That is very difficult, especially if you have a special needs infant and then an infant who's only a couple months younger.
Yeah.
But still, that alone should not be getting you only 1 hour of sleep a night, because in the book, she talks about countless nights without sleep. And these are nights where she says her children are sleeping. She says the house is quiet. She says her bed is comfortable. And so the things that we would look at like as kind of a first line defense against insomnia are not affecting her.
Sleep hygiene, as we call it.
Yes, which I'll talk about a little bit at the end. So some typical causes of regular insomnia, the insomnia that most people may experience at least once in their life, would be stress, changes in your travel or your work schedule, poor sleep hygiene, sleep habits, eating too late at night because your body is maybe uncomfortable while you're digesting if you're trying to go to sleep right after that. Mental health disorders like anxiety and depression can absolutely impact your sleep. So can PTSD and other mental health conditions. It can be a side effect of medication, can be insomnia, or even if you're taking medication for it, it can make the insomnia worse. A lot of other medical conditions like chronic pain, cancer, diabetes, heart disease, asthma, sleep apnea, any GI issues, thyroid issues, that's a huge one. Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's can also impact your sleep because of the neurological changes in your brain with those disorders. There's also a bunch of sleep disorders proper, like restless leg syndrome, parasomnias, things like that can impact your quality of sleep, and so it can reduce your sleep. And then use of caffeine, nicotine, alcohol, any substances can also impact your sleep. Like I said before, as you age, your sleep needs change. But the typical risk factors for insomnia, unfortunately, are being female. Hormones, especially around menopause, can impact your sleep negatively. Mental health problems, physical health problems, stress, if you don't have a typical schedule. Something it doesn't talk a lot about in some of my sources I use, the Mayo Clinic, National Institute of Health. They don't talk about other things that can impact your sleep. So I actually did cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia training with the VA. And so they talk a lot about how when you're in the military, your sleep schedule is purposely not set. You're not allowed to sleep. You have to stay up, things like that. And then once you're home on leave or you are discharged or there's some sort of circumstance that's changed, now your sleep schedule is completely off. And so now you have to restart. And so sometimes insomnia is kind of purposeful, but it's not like, oh, I work a night shift. It's more than that. It's more significant than that. So some of the typical treatments for typical pharmacological interventions for insomnia can be benzodiazepines, like we talked about. Melatonin is one that a lot of people go to, but that, and I'm not going to go into the details of all these drugs. We're just kind of talking about general treatments. We talked about benzos equal bad. Again, the medication itself works. It's just not meant for long time use, and it's not meant for high dosages. It's, if you're like when I was taking my licensing exam, I had insomnia because I was anxious. So, I took a couple times, to sleep at night. That was it. It wasn't like I was taking it every single day. It wasn't like I was taking high dosages. And after that prescription ran out, my doctor was not going to refill it. And that's the way that it should be done, because the addiction potential with certain things like Ativan especially, you can become addicted after about a week of daily use. So it happens very quickly. So you want to be very careful with that stuff. But I also don't want people freaking out and be like, I've got it in my medicine cabinet and I use it once a month. That's using it as prescribed.
Appropriate.
That's appropriate. Use. Yeah. Some non-benzodiazepine drugs, which are also working to address the GABA receptors in your brain, can be drugs like, I don't remember the brand name, so I just have the generics.
Ambien, Zolpidem?
Yes, I was going to say Zolpidem.
Zolpidem is Ambien. Yeah,
Yeah.
which everyone knows the name Ambien.
But I've also heard terrible things about Ambien. So
sleepwalking?
Yes, sleepwalking is a big one with Ambien, and that can be very dangerous. But
yes,
that's for another episode. I have a whole movie about that.
Sleepwalking? We can definitely talk about that. And the other thing with Ambien is actually years later. That was a kind of big pharma drug. The others were all generic for a very long time. But Ambien was like, when I first came out of school, that was like it. They were there.
I remember the commercials with the little purple butterfly.
And I thought that was the Rosarum commercials, but maybe not. But it was big. And later they have now reduced the dosage for female patients. It used to be 10 milligrams for everyone, but now it's 5 for females. So that was later post-marketing because of the side effect potential at the 10 milligram dose. So we have to be very careful with things like that. And that one again is not necessarily, I don't know that we can describe it as addictive, but it's that
it's dangerous.
When you stop using it, you cannot sleep. So it's not correcting the actual problem.
Exactly. And then a lot of these other drugs, so there's the dual orexin receptor antagonist, or DORAs. They can also be helpful. They're long-acting, but then they can cause daytime sleepiness and have a lot of adverse side effects. So they're not necessarily the first thing that someone's going to go to. So some of the side effects can be hypnagogic and hypnopompic hallucinations, which, again, that's a whole nother episode, but it's basically when you're not fully awake or not fully asleep, and then you're starting to hallucinate things because your brain is in between that wake and rest cycle that initiates sleep. You can have cataplexy-like symptoms, sleep paralysis. It can interact with a lot of drugs. It's not used for narcolepsy. So a lot of times these medications, they're only used for such a small amount of time. Most people may not even have heard of them or use them. And then there's other medications. So there's Melatonin, which is basically a synthetic of melatonin. We know that
that's the Rosarum. Yep.
Yes.
That one, if it got covered more, I'd use it more. But
never
had really good insurance coverage.
Yeah, that's another thing. Some of these other medications might be safer or might be more effective, but if your insurance isn't going to cover it, then that's you're kind of stuck in a bind with that. Doxepin, which is a selective histamine receptor antagonist. I guess that. And again, I'm not going deep into the drugs, but I'm assuming that is what is probably close to Benadryl, and that's why people always say to take Benadryl for sleep, which we know that's not appropriate.
Right. It's a first generation antihistamine. So Benadryl, the Doxepin, and hydroxyzine we use for anxiety and sleep sometimes. So once in a while, I mean, I've been known to take Benadryl if I'm going like on vacation in a weird place and I know that I'm not going to sleep, I'll take literally a half of a 25 milligram Benadryl, so 12.5, which is less than a child's dose.
Right.
But you have to be careful because there are a lot of side effects, especially the next day, because it does not clear from your system.
Exactly.
And so you have to be very careful.
Yeah. And then there's a lot of off-label prescription uses. So they're FDA approved, but they're not approved for insomnia. So a lot of the antidepressants. So trazodone is technically an antidepressant, but a lot of people take that for sleep. Mirtazapine, gabapentin, and then some antipsychotics.
Seroquel. Seroquel is a big one for sleep people use. I personally do prescribe trazodone quite a bit for sleep because it is generally very safe.
Yes.
And then the mirtazapine, also known as Remeron, we use a lot in the nursing homes because it helps with sleep, but it also helps with appetite. And these patients tend to have, if they have Alzheimer's or something else, it tends to be safe, increase their appetite, help their sleep. So that was an alternative that we did use quite a bit.
Right. And then we already talked about Benadryl, antihistamines, which can cause sleepiness, but it's really not what they're supposed to be used for, but people are using it for that. And then we all know, I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole of supplements and what's regulated and unregulated, but some of the ones that I'm sure a lot of people hear about these days are ashwagandha, chamomile flower, magnesium, glycine, L-theanine, valerian root. I used valerian root once. That stuff knocked me out. I was like, whoa. So I only used that once, but it worked. But I didn't like the way that it made me feel. Melatonin, like we talked about. And then we know that sometimes people are using recreational substances, THC, CBD, things like that, which I know that there's more and growing research about the effectiveness of that, but it's still not fully regulated for sleep and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be nice if cannabis could get actually studied, but because of the federal laws conflicting with the state laws, we can't really get good studies. I think that there is a place that maybe they could
absolutely
find some ways to use this therapeutically, but we just don't have enough information.
Not yet. I think we're moving in the direction, but it's going to be a slow roll. There's a lot of red tape, a lot of politics around it, but I think at least we're kind of one step in that positive direction versus, people not talking about it at all. And then a lot of people recreationally, they'll have a glass of wine at night to relax and go to sleep or things like that, or have a drink. And so people are doing these things, but it's not really the most effective, and it's really not addressing why you have the insomnia. It's just kind of knocking you out until the next day, and then you start all over again.
Right. I mean, not that at our age we drink like we did when we were younger, but I do remember after a night of partying, maybe you're knocked out for the first half of the night, but that second half you're very restless. It is not good for your body. You are just a mess. And so it's really not great for your actual true sleep-wake cycles.
Yeah. And then the non-medicinal approaches, like I kind of alluded to before, are sleep hygiene approaches. So sleep hygiene, in a nutshell, it's looking at what your environment is for your sleep and making sure that it is optimized for sleep. So making sure your room's the right temperature, that your mattress is comfortable, your sheets and your bedding are comfortable for you, temperature-wise, weight-wise, texture-wise, that it's quiet enough, that there's not too much light, what you're eating before bed and how soon, or if you're exercising, how close to sleep. So looking at those things that you can control in your environment and trying to make it optimal for sleep that works best for you. And then, like I talked about before, there is a cognitive behavioral therapy specifically for insomnia. And I'm not going to go deep into that, but like I said before, I was trained through the VA on that. Shout out to the University for I'm reading it wrong. I can't do a shout out right. I'm sorry, guys. Where is it? I wrote it down. No, I can't find it. Oh, here we go. Sorry. So I was trained by the Uniformed Services University Center for Psychology Deployment, or Deployment Psychology. And so they did focus a lot of the talk on when you're working with people who are in active military or veterans and how their sleep might be impacted. But these CBTI tools are for use for anyone. And so what you are doing, in a nutshell, I'm not going to go in detail, is you are tracking your sleep with a sleep journal or a sleep log. You're looking at some of those environmental factors, looking at any other factors like anxiety, things like that, your work schedule, a spouse in the bed who maybe is snoring and that's why you're having trouble sleeping, looking at many different ways of things that could be impacting your sleep and then trying to adjust those. There's some people really kind of push back on the CBTI because there's what we call sleep restriction. So looking at what your natural sleep cycle is when you're naturally tired versus when you get in bed. A lot of people tend to get in bed because it's a certain time, but they may not be physically tired, or vice versa. They don't get in bed until a certain time, but they were exhausted an hour earlier. And then the time that you naturally wake up. So if you naturally wake up at 4 a.m., you should be up at 4 a.m. every day. And that can be a tough pill to swallow for a lot of people. No pun intended.
All those lovely people who get up and exercise at 4 a.m.
I don't know how they do it.
Good for you.
I don't know how they do it.
I'm hitting snooze.
Yeah, same. So they look at your sleep onset latency. So that's what I was talking about, when you actually feel tired, versus when you have to wake up in the morning, and then kind of measuring how much sleep you get on average and trying to get that to an optimal level through kind of adjusting things little bit by little bit over a series of weeks to see if that helps you address and adjust your sleep. And there's kind of this really nice, on my National Institute of Health link that will be in the show notes. There's a really nice kind of flow chart that says that ideally, if you want to address insomnia, you should begin with CBTI. And then if that's not effective, then start medication, not jump to medication first. And so I think that's really helpful because a lot of people's issues with sleep can be more easily addressed by looking at those other environmental factors, personal factors, treating those other things that are impacting your sleep versus jumping right to a sleep medication.
So what, the problem, I guess, because again, primary care first line, can't get someone into a psychologist. I don't know if that psychologist is certified in,
yes.
TI. And so, what recommendations can I start with? Like I say, the dark room, similar time of night, no screens. I know that's a huge one. But what else can I get patients started with? Because it may take time for them to actually get the right therapy.
So I think the first thing when they're coming to see you in primary care, ruling out those medical issues, those possible psychological diagnoses, because if there's something else that needs to be treated, even the best sleep hygiene or the best CBTI is not going to address if somebody has GI issues, if somebody has heartburn and reflux that's causing issues at night. So really doing the full medical workup before saying, hey, you need therapy for your insomnia.
Okay. And I am ordering sleep studies because sometimes patients fall asleep but then wake up and they don't know why they woke up, and sometimes that is sleep apnea. The one company I'm using now does home sleep studies, and they actually also have an insomnia type that they can run. So I haven't used that one yet, but that's something new that I'm going to start doing. I am looking for sleep apnea. I've recommended patients to do like meditation apps on, things like that. I don't know a great one to recommend per se, but I'll be like, hey, there's a million of them out there. Find one that works for you. And it's hard to
keep up. There's so many out there and more come out every day. So it's kind of hard to keep up with that. But I think that's really in primary care where I would start, is making sure that you've fully ruled out those other things, because a lot of times people will get referred to psychology or get referred to a sleep study, but then they're like, well, they've got serious GI issues, like address the GI issues. So trying to look at everything and then go from there. And then also, working as a team. There's so many times I see people and then I try to reach out to their primary care or, their sleep study or something like that. And it's really hard to connect with those other providers. So if you are referring, making sure that you're following up and seeing if you're working in that team approach and we're not, accidentally giving people opposite things to do.
True.
And then the last thing I want to talk about that came up in the book, and it's extremely rare, but you know how I love something rare and sexy sounding, is fatal familial insomnia. Have you heard of that?
Fatal?
Fatal, yes. Have you heard of that?
I don't think so.
Yeah. So it's extremely rare, but it is a genetic degenerative brain disorder, which starts off with an inability to sleep, so insomnia, that could start off as mild but progressively worsens and leads to significant physical and mental deterioration. So this comes up in the book, and it's kind of like a throwaway. Like she says it to a doctor, and the doctor's like, no, you don't have it, but did not even assess for it, which I'm like, after having read the whole book, and she does end up having some other severe medical issues. She has a stroke at some point. So like, they really should have checked this stuff out. But
I would have been like, I don't know enough about that.
Yeah.
Let me get back to you.
Yeah. Basically the doctor was like, no, you don't have that.
Let me refer you to neurology.
Yeah. So it's FFI, fatal familial insomnia, and familial because it is genetic, but it's extremely rare. And then there's also a related disorder called sporadic fatal insomnia, or SFI. That one does not have the gene, but both of them end up having difficulty with the production of a certain prion protein in the brain that causes the difficulty with sleep and the degeneration of things in the brain, which then ultimately lead to death, unfortunately. Like I said, it's extremely rare. It doesn't come up that often. You would have to have genetic testing for it and a lot of other imaging to identify that's really what's going on. But it is a real thing. And obviously not a lovely prognosis. It says it right there in the name. But once people are diagnosed, usually they end up passing away between 7 months and 70 months after diagnosis.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, it's pretty rapid. One of the sources I closed some of my windows, said that it's typically diagnosed around the age of 40. So again, that's where that woman in the book was, around that age. And then it can, like I said, starts off with insomnia, gets progressively worse. The lack of sleep leads to significant physical and mental deterioration. So weight loss, confusion, difficulty regulating your body temperature, sweating, trouble breathing, trouble regulating your heartbeat. And then your autonomic nervous system just goes haywire. And it's a quick, but it sounds like a very scary and very upsetting decline. So that is, and then it says FFI is classified as a transmissible spongiform encephalopathy. Or a prion disease. So
wait, I thought prions though are infectious. I thought, but this is saying
prions are a protein. Certain of them are infectious.
Right.
So there's different prion diseases like Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease.
Right. Otherwise known as mad cow. Right.
Yes.
Yep.
So I don't believe all prions are infectious, but certain ones are.
Yeah,
That makes sense.
I don't know. I don't know enough about this.
Yeah.
It'll be on my rare disease radar though, because I do have like rare disease radar. I'm definitely always looking for the thing.
And it's so funny you said that because the site that I got all that information from is rarediseases.org.
See?
Yeah. Which has a wealth of information on it, and it's updated pretty frequently. This was last updated in July of 2023. So looks like every time they do studies on this stuff, they're updating this site for both professionals to access and also the general public. Yeah.
Nice. Like I said, special login.
Yes.
You know, the insider login for
I don't have any
professionals.
special logins to anything.
All right. So I think we've covered quite a bit today.
I think we have.
You know, we have more to come. I think that hopefully we have some more followers. Tell your friends. Let's get some international
Tell your mom,
followers.
tell your dad, tell your sister, tell your coworkers.
Help your mom download it.
Yes, I did.
You know, even a friend of mine, I had to like send like a link, like this is it.
And I sent her the link. She still didn't know what to do. So I just...
Yeah. So, I mean, we are for sure now. We are on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeart, Amazon, Podbean. And then there were 3 new things from Podbean. There were other websites. I'm not going to remember their names, but a little bit. If you Google us, I'm pretty sure we're going to be there. We are on Instagram, Medical Media Mixer, TikTok, Medical Media Mixer, YouTube, Medical Media Mixer Podcast, Pinterest. Yes,
Medical Media Mixer board. It's a public board. I don't really know how it works. I just love Pinterest, so I made one. It's probably dumb, but I don't care. It's there.
It's the things we know how to do. We're figuring it out.
Yes.
Email.
And yes, we've got our email at medicalmediamixer@gmail.com. Send us a message, give us feedback, let us know what you think of the podcast. Give us any suggestions of things you think we should cover.
Yeah, we would love to do one day, have enough information for a listener's episode. That would be a lot of fun.
That would be very cool.
Involve everybody in this. And I think, you know, we'll have some more interesting stuff for the next episode. We had a little meeting. We're collaborating. We're ready to go.
Yeah. We're off. Right, we're doing this thing.
Yeah. Thank you for listening to Medical Media Mixer.
The perfect cocktail.
Cheers.